Well, welcome everybody. My name is Jeff Nee. I'm with the Museum and Informal Education Alliance, and Alan Gould from the PPA is hosting us today. Thank you to Alan. And we're just here to hang out and answer all your questions about image processing. There are a plethora of different programs that you can use today where we plan to feature one or two, but if you have more, this is the whole point of the workshop, is that anyone is welcome to share. We're just going to start off with Alan right away. Alan's going to show us a program called Krita, Krita. So Alan, go ahead.
Okay, well, I have to disclaimer that I am not a professional artist. I'm not an expert in graphics, but I do find it handy to grab graphics or to add or alter graphics. I do a fair amount of that, actually, a surprising amount, but not to consider myself any kind of expert at it. And over the years, I've looked for free open source programs, and that's what we're focusing on today, is the free and open source apps. If you have one that you want to share that's really, a commercial one that has really neat things, that's probably okay too, but the main focus is on free and open source. And Krita is the one that I discovered a few years ago that I find very helpful. So this is what Krita looks like when you launch it. And I'll tell you I'll put in the chat at the end of when I'm talking, I'll put in the website that you can find Krita, but it pops up first when you just search for Krita, Krita. First thing I want to do is a resize. Okay, so let me just pull up a graphic these are the recent documents. You can do a new document or open a file that's already done. Those are standard things. There's also a user manual and tutorials and things that are all linked from this splash page too. You can drag an image into this to open an image, but I'm just going to open this one that I had started with. And one of the most common things that I do is to resize it. Okay, so you can see down here, this tells you the size of it down here and also how big the file is. And you can zoom in on it, but that's not changing the size. To actually change the size, you have to go into scale image to a new size, which has this, I always use this keyboard shortcut. I'm on a Mac, by the way, so it may look a little different if you're on a Windows. But anyway, let's just see what that looks like. The dialog box here. Now, I always want to be careful to either have it proportional, keep the proportionality, which is this little locking thing here. If it's locked, then the proportions will stay. So if I want to make this half the size, I would change this to 600 pixels, and it automatically changes that proportionally, the width and the height. And I click OK. So that's basic thing number one that any graphics program should be able to do. That's handy for just making files smaller. Notice it's down to 2 megabytes now. Okay, so if you want to compress something, or not well, it's compressing, it's making the file smaller. If you want to email it, for instance, a smaller file, or send it somehow a smaller file, you can do it that way. A lot of times you just need a file that's smaller, that looks smaller. Let's undo. That's a very nice thing to have. Always know the keyboard shortcut for undo. On a Mac, it's Command Z. Suppose I wanted to make this bigger and put another image next to it. Okay, like just to the right of it. That you can do by resizing the canvas. Okay, so here we can. It's 1200 right now. Suppose I want to add another image that's the same width beside it. So I'm going to change it to, I'm going to unlink this and just change that to 2400. So that's going to make the canvas wider so I can paste in other things beside it. Okay, now you have to, these little things down here, tell you which way it's going to expand the canvas. So if I put it in this corner, well, let's see what happens. If I do the relative anchor to that corner, then click OK. So it adds space out there. And by the way, if you see an array like this of rectangles, of gray, dark gray and light gray rectangles, that means it's transparent. That's a sign of transparency. So if we were to project this onto a planetarium dome, for instance, whatever was on the dome would show through that area. Okay, so I could take and paste in another picture here. So, and I can, that's a useful function too. So that's the resizing canvas. We can select and copy paste things. Okay, well that's kind of a neat thing. Suppose I just wanted to get this fish, you know, this one fish here and paste it somewhere else. Okay, so if I over here on these tools, if you go down far enough, you find selection tools. So you can do a rectangular selection, a circular or elliptical selection. In fact, let's choose that. And let me select. When you're doing an elliptical, you have to kind of pretend it's a rectangle and then draw it. And you can adjust it or move it around. I'm doing a copy just with a keyboard command, Command C. And so I'm copying that. Now, once I copy it, I could create a new document. Okay, let's just make a new, this is a new, create a new thing, but this says actually if you create from clipboard. And this is extremely useful. So if you find something somewhere that you want to copy and then manipulate in Krita, you can copy it, do a screen grab of that particular area, and then say create something from what you have on the clipboard. And there it is, what I selected, and it's created a new document with that. I could also take that and paste it in to the same document if I wanted to make a copy of it. And then let's see, there's a to move. I think it's copied directly over where it was. So there's a second copy of that fish right on top of it. And in order to move it, I need to get the move icon, which is this one here. Then I can move it. Okay. So there's tricky stuff here. You have to know what each of these tools do. And I don't know what each of these tools do, but some of them are obvious, like these shapes, the selection tools at the bottom. There's a cropping tool. Of course, this is a cropping tool is very useful. That's select the cropping tool, and I could, oh, this is interesting. Okay, I'm always learning things. I'm always learning what things happen. Okay, but most of you have probably done cropping in the past. I'm not going to go through with that. I want to move to something else and show you a couple of things that I did. There are filters. So in order to demonstrate filters, let me just close this. I don't want to save it. I'll close that one. I don't want to save that one either. But what I want to do is show you this diagram, or this is a map that I use in the that we've used in the Constellations Tonight show, except that it's been cropped and cut down. The idea here was that in the Constellations Tonight show, we would hand out maps to everybody in the audience and teach them how to use the map to find the constellations. That's the essence of the show. And it's an audience activity show. But you have to have lights to shine on the people's maps, and that's a problem with bigger planetariums. So my idea was that I could project parts of these maps onto the horizons. This is a view towards the east, so I could project a small map down on the eastern horizon that shows what people are going to be looking for in that part of the sky. But this is white. It would be stark. You don't want to have a big white thing on the dome. So you probably would want to go to a filter. And I'm not going to go into all the different filters that are available. You can see that there's a ton of filters available. The emboss I was playing with earlier, that's kind of a neat one. But just for this purpose, if you want to change black to white and white to black, you use the invert filter, and that does it. And then that will be a nicer thing for projecting onto the dome. I wanted to show you, I think, one more thing, and that is that a lot of times I want to have an image. I get an image from somewhere, but I want to add some text to it. Okay, so that's a very simple thing that any graphics program should be able to do also. So let me close this one and do one more thing. And that is with, I wanted to show you this diagram that I created a while back. It's a seasons. This is a diagram that I created because most of the diagrams that are trying to illustrate seasons, the reasons for seasons, are very confusing in terms of the, well, they're misleading in terms of the orbit being not circular, okay? And people will confuse and think that it's the non-circularity of the orbit that causes the seasons just by a glance. So I wanted to make a diagram that was obviously not circular, but it was also a circle that is seen edgewise. And the way I decided to do that was to make a perspective. This one's bigger, this one's smaller. Obviously, everything's not to scale. And I have a little note saying that down here. But this is too busy a diagram, okay? I've added a bunch of text here, and this would be more like for a textbook. So when instead, this is not something I would put on a dome. It's too busy. It'd be more like a explanation in a book or on paper. But you can select the different text areas. I could take all the texts, and just select them all and delete them. Okay, and get a diagram like that. And that's a lot cleaner to put on the dome. If you wanted to make a new text, you would select the text tool here, and then just, let's say I'm going to put it there. And then a little dialog pops up here. I have to move this out of the way. And you can put in your text, seasons. And you can control the color and the font size and everything. So we can make this yellow, and usually it has to be a lot bigger than you think. And we'll save that, and let's see if it came up on there. There it is. And if I get my move icon, I can move that. Whoops, not that. Oh, I know what happened. I have to tell you about one more thing, which everybody needs to know about. There's layers, okay? And the layers are controlled here. Okay, so I have the text layer controlled. It's this tool that allows me to grab it and move it around. And so I have these different layers that I created for different parts of the diagram so I could deal with them separately. And that's a very important thing when you're trying to separate out different parts of your drawing or of your illustration. And you can in this program, you can create a new layer, which is a paint layer, or I usually use either a paint layer or a vector layer. A vector is something where you can draw shapes, and a paint layer is something that is like a painting, pixels. So a lot of you are probably familiar with the idea of layers. And I think that's about all that I should say about this, unless there's some questions about Krita.
Yeah, I think that was a great introduction. And the thing I should mention about Krita versus the other program that we're going to use is Krita does print really well. It does CMYK for those of you who know printers. So if you're printing out something physical, say a handout or a flyer or something, or a poster even, Krita is one of the better options for you.
I might mention that just before this meeting, I found in the history part of the thing is that the development of this began in 1998 with a guy who was trying to show how to hack a program, and he used GIMP as the example at this conference. Okay, and I think Jeff is going to be talking about GIMP now, so this is a good segue into GIMP. What he created there eventually became Krita, separate from GIMP.
Great, good segue. Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste the link to this presentation in the chat. So you should just be able to jump to it and feel free, because I'm not going to go through the whole thing. This is just one example of how I use the GNU Image Manipulation Program, also known as GIMP. I should start by saying that NASA does not endorse or sponsor any of these programs. It's important for me to say, but they are completely free and you're allowed to use them as you like. So this is a curriculum that I actually developed for a local museum in the Los Angeles area. They were looking for something for their high schoolers to do that was NASA related, that was really interesting and engaging. And so I created this curriculum for them called Stories from Space. And all it does is it takes people through the basics of what Alan showed you of how to work with images. And I also added the extra bump of you can actually use these programs, these free programs, to process NASA data and create your own space images. So I'm just going to kind of run through this whole slideshow really quickly. I always start with a KWL chart. For those people who don't know what a KWL chart, it's know, want to know, and learn. And so you just start with this, and you just say, well, what have you heard about photoshopping? Because that's the generic term, kind of like Xeroxing or Kleenex, right? Photoshop is the generic term now, even though it's the brand name of a commercial program. But that's how people kind of know this whole section of image processing. What do you know about Photoshop? What do you want to know about Photoshop? All of that stuff. And then you just kind of start going through the basis of almost all of NASA content is entirely free to use. Public domain is the key term, and you can use it pretty much however you like, but with some restrictions. And so this is the Juno mission logo. This was when the mission had started getting data from Jupiter. And this just shows you kind of the basics of what Alan showed you, but in GIMP this time. And one thing I like to tell people about is that in GIMP, you can actually customize the look and feel of the toolbars. So if you remember Alan's, they had the giant, column of tools on the side, and they all kind of look the same color. I like making my tools different colors. I feel like it helps me. So that's a nice pro tip that you can take from this, is that you can customize how GIMP looks and feels. If you're looking, here's my live GIMP. It's in, so the edit menu, preferences comes up, and it's just one of these. The interface is very customizable, if you can see it. Right, and so this is where you can choose like the legacy, you can choose color, you can choose a whole bunch of stuff. You can also group, and under the toolbox, you can group your toolboxes and make them different things. I just like having it like this. So again, however you want to work with it, whatever is best for your own workflow, you can customize it easily. The idea is that you can actually group these tools into different sections. So one is, so like at the top, I've grouped them all into selection tools. Then the greens are all transform tools, how you can change what you're seeing. And then all the blue highlighted tools are what you can add or what you can remove from that image. And then these are just a couple of activities, simple activities for your kids to just get their toes wet on things like selection. What's the next one? These are things that Alan just showed you. One thing I should mention is that you can very precisely select specific sections, even pixel by pixel, if you want to get that granular. And so if you wanted, for example, that fish, if you want a fish flying around in your dome, and you just want literally the fish, you can go in and select the fins, carefully select all the fins, and cut out exactly as if you were cutting a piece of paper and pasting it on your dome, except it's digital. So you can get that detailed if you want. This is still selection. So transforms, Alan showed you resizing and moving stuff and rotating stuff. You can stretch things however you want. And you can draw, like Alan said, you can paint, you can draw squiggly lines wherever you want. And again, this is all NASA stuff, so you can do pretty much whatever you want with it. Again, some restrictions if you care to ask about those. And then this is just painting, filling, the fill tool. What I want to get across is that we have come light years away from MS Paint. For those people who remember that, all those old programs, just the fact that you can do layers, like Alan was showing you, you can do one layer at a time and adjust it and save those layers is extremely powerful. And I should mention that the file format for GIMP is XCF. That's the default file format. It can open others if you have others, but .xcf is the default file format. And this is just teaching about layers, just like Alan taught you. And again, this is something that you would go through with Classroom, of saying, these are the things, these are the types of things that you can do. And I was telling Dennis earlier that you do not need to be an expert in this. My goal for you is just for you to introduce the concept to students. Introduce the concept that this is available to them. This is completely free. If they have a computer, they don't even need internet once they download the file. This is completely offline. And once they have it, they can do anything they can imagine. Anything they can imagine. And especially, I should mention, I developed this before the introduction of AI art, right? A lot of people have been hearing about that. AI art is very powerful. You tell it what you want, it pops out an image, but you may have seen those really, really weird images and they're not perfect. You can actually take that AI art, bring it into programs like this and make it perfect, make it exactly the way you want. It will save you hours and hours of time. Anyone now can be a professional digital artist. It's the field is wide open. And yes, NASA does hire graphic artists. We definitely need graphic designers. We definitely need artistic people here at NASA. And this is just one of the ways that you can spark that in students. All right. This is a section where I'm actually introducing students to the concept that images are just data. Images are data. So when you say NASA data, people think of graphs and numbers. Images are data to NASA scientists. And these are images. Bonus if you know what mission this is from. There are websites, NASA websites, where you can actually go grab the raw image data that you can manipulate, you can work with however you like. And so this one, I'm giving people an example of how to take red, green, and blue channels and mix them all together into an actual color image. So this is just a process, step-by-step process on how to do that. I'm not going to go into it, but you can take a look for yourself. And one of the reasons why I chose this particular activity was because Juno had the JunoCam, which is actually a citizen science image processing project that NASA runs, where you get the raw data and you create the images. It's called JunoCam, and if you've never heard of it, please check it out. Again, all the information is here. I have copious slide notes on each of the slides, so please check those out.
Back up just for a second.
Yeah.
Paul Serial says that it's the surveyor. Was it
the previous? Oh, this one. Good guess, Paul. This is MER. This is the MERS. I can't remember exactly which one this one was.
Okay, so no extra credit. No extra credit.
Extra credit, Paul. But good guess. Good guess. All right. And yeah, so back to JunoCam. What they did is, again, they post all this stuff online, and all this is just raw data, almost raw data. They do very little processing. All of these citizen science are taking this data and they're making amazing images. If you've seen a Jupyter image in the last few years from the GNU CAM, it's all been processed by volunteers. And so this just shows you step by step on how to do this. And these are just some examples of stuff that users, that citizens, scientists have created these amazing images from the GNU CAM data using mostly free software. Some people have the commercial software, but the free software works just fine. Again, it goes through step by step on how to do it. This is a little slide to show people, to teach students about Creative Commons licenses and intellectual property, if you care to go into that. A lot of people think it's a little dicey to do that, but it's at least important to mention that if you create something, you have the ability to license it however you want, right? And NASA, again, is public domain, so you can take that source data, that source image, and you can pretty much do whatever you want with it and then license it as something that you own if you wanted to. And if you don't, then you release it to the world and let people have it. So the last thing you do is go back to that KDLBL chart in this activity and say, what have you actually learned after doing this whole workshop?
I have a question that just occurred to me about when I'm in Krita, when I export something, the format makes a big difference. You can export to different formats. There's JPEG, there's PNG, there's GIF or GIF. I have found that PNG preserves transparency, which is really important for planetarium,
Yes.
but JPEG does not.
No.
So are there other formats that preserve transparency?
TIFF, the TIFF file format.
TIFF, yeah, TIFF does, yeah, TIFF. TIF. DDS also does, that's right. Yeah, so there are a lot. Like, I'm like you, Alan. I just do PNGs most of the time. TIFF is uncompressed, so if you really need something super high resolution at the original quality, I would say TIFF is how most people do it. People at NASA like TIFF, for example, for scientific data. Daria, did you have a question or something to add?
Yes, a couple months ago, I searched the web for raw data from GNU CAM. It seems to me that NASA selects some files to make available as JPEG. Most of the raw data is in HDF format, and I could not find a way to open those files. I could see the text attached to the files, but I could not extract the images in any reasonable quality from that.
Okay. If you email me later, I can get you those instructions. Again, people don't really think about it like that. People think, oh, a photo is a photo. Photo isn't data, a picture isn't data, but it is. Every single pixel has numbers attached to it. And when you're doing a space mission, and that is the data, and these programs just happen to be able to read these formats, JPEG or PNG or whatever, and output it as an image that you can make sense of. What's really interesting is that you can actually do this in Excel or in a spreadsheet. You can input the numbers into a spreadsheet, color them based on the numbers, and you can zoom out of the spreadsheet and you can see the image. You can see the image. I've done this. It's a pretty interesting activity to do with students because people don't think of pictures as data, but it is. It's numbers. It's math, and all of these transformations, all of these processes, all these programs, all they're doing is doing math to those values in the pixels, in the spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheets, if that makes sense. So yeah, so email me separately and I'll see what I can do for you in terms of getting you those instructions. Okay. You have my email, right, Daria?
I do.
Okay, great. Tish, which activity is best for the kids? So again, so this activity, I wrote it for high school. This activity. It could go down to middle school depending on your exact application. I wouldn't recommend it for elementary school kids, depending on the kids, obviously, right? This is broad strokes here, right? So for elementary school kids, the concept of digital art is an important concept to wrap your head around. So what I would do is I would actually give them the paper and pen, because if you notice, I mean, I'll go back to my live game. all these layers, everything you do, the cut and paste, the selection, it's literally like you're working with paper, right? If you've ever done any scrapbooking or anything like that, cutting pieces out, putting them in layers, positioning them. The only thing you can't really do is shrink them, I suppose, and shrink and grow them. But yeah, if I were doing a little kid activity with NASA art, that's what I would actually do. I would actually give them printouts and pen and paper and pencils and scissors and have them make art that way. Say make a NASA collage or something. And Rosemary, did anyone, Rosemary, we do actually have a full Jupiter from Hubble, actually. Did James want to do one? I don't think so, not yet. But Hubble has a really recent, like I think the last one was 2019. They did a full map of Jupiter. And if you email me, I can send you that. I don't have it offhand. Yeah, so Tish, if I were forced to do a little kid version, I would give them pen and paper and physical stuff, because the concepts are the same. The concept of creating art from NASA imagery, manipulating layers, cutting and pasting, all of that is the same. But I feel like little kids would benefit a lot from that physicality of being hands-on. What do you think, Alan?
Yeah, it has to be simple.
Yeah.
It has to be very simple for younger kids.
So Rosemary's asking, can you do it through a browser or Chromebook? Have you heard of Canva, Rosemary? That's a browser-based.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a browser-based one. It's limited, right? So these give you much more power if you can actually install a program. But especially if it's a Chromebook these days can use Android apps, at least the newer ones. So if you have a newer Chromebook, you can try looking for an actual app that will do that. And actually, Photoshop has one, I think. Adobe Photoshop actually has a.
There's one I discovered long ago, and I don't know how good it is now. Pixlr.com. I can't recommend it, but I just discovered it many years ago.
Yeah, and Walter, a color by numbers thing with just grids is very powerful. And actually, my 4-year-old actually does that. They give them like these patterns, and each of the patterns has a designated color, and you can't tell what the picture is going to be until you fill out all the colors. I mean, I can tell, but they can't. Is the idea. Okay, then I'm going to move on real quickly to the extension activities I have, because these are examples of things that I've done recently in the last year or so. So thing number one is layer groups and masks. So Alan showed you layer by layer, but you can of course group layers and manipulate them as a group. And one thing that I love to do for my shows is I love to feather the edges. I like to fade the edges of my images on my dome, which makes for a really nice effect because it kind of looks like it's blending into the background as it goes. And so this is just a slide that shows you how to do that kind of. And a layer mask is just a way to non-destructively tell GIMP what you want to see and what you don't want to see. By non-destructive, I mean you're not actually erasing the data from the image. You're not erasing the actual pixels. You're just telling it to mask those pixels. And it's a fine distinction, but it's an important one, especially if you're working on something and you make a mistake and you didn't mean to erase that, and oh no, your computer just crashed, and oh, you can't get it back, right? So non-destructively using layer masks to affect transparency and stuff like that is a powerful tool in my toolbox, and I really like it because if you do a layer group and then you mask that whole group, you can do it really quickly to a whole bunch of files. The next thing is the selection tools. Just like you saw with Alan, you can do it by square, by ellipse. You can go in and actually draw the selection yourself. There's a whole bunch of other tools. There's the feather selection, shrink, grow. You can even save selections if you want to use them later. So let's say you have this nice image, like say that fish that Alan had, and you really want to save that pattern, and you worked really hard. You spent like hours just getting every single pixel. And the problem is that if you click away, guess what? It's all gone. Your hour of work is gone. But in this one, you can actually save that selection into, they call it a path in GIMP. I don't know what it's called in Krita, but you can save it so you can always use it later. And you can do other things and then come back to it.
There's another kind of selection that's possible in both GIMP and Krita, and that is by color.
By color.
Select, and by gradations of color even. It's a very powerful way to select areas of contiguous colors.
Yeah. And on the side here, you'll notice that GIMP actually has very, very fine-tuned controls for each of these broad tools. So you select one, say I'm like in this case, I'm selecting the gradient tool, and you can say, oh, I want a radial gradient, or I want a linear gradient, or I want it to be really deep, or I want to change the threshold, or I want to change exactly where it starts and exactly where it ends. I can set the exact endpoint. Again, anything you can imagine. This really doesn't help you if you're a perfectionist like me. You can spend hours and hours on this one thing, but hopefully this gives you an idea of how powerful you can do and the fact that you can create anything you can imagine. And then what's the next thing? Oh, this is something that somebody asked on Dome Dialogues recently. Somebody asked me, how do you they had a video of a panorama, of a historical panorama that they wanted in their dome. And so you take the video, you just screenshot it a bunch of times, or you can use a video editing program. We've done Blender before, and you take the frames, and you can actually stitch them all together into a complete panorama that will go around your whole dome. And there are a whole bunch of tools to do this. You can do the uniform transform tool that I have up here, highlighted up here. There's something called the cloning tool, which is like a magic eraser that you can use to like fudge things and blend things together really well. And then there's an actual smudge tool that I use sometimes. And if you're looking at this, I don't know, I hope you can't tell where the seam is. I actually stitched this one, but you shouldn't be able to tell. That's the whole point. I stitched these two panels together into a hopefully seamless, or at least on the surface seamless whole panorama that you can put around your whole dome or put anywhere you want. And this is actually really great for Mars panoramas, if you want like the very latest Mars panoramas, because the next one is, oh yes, here you go. So this is the updated version of that MER page, where you can grab the raw images from the Mars rovers literally before the team even sees it. There's a direct pipeline that goes from the rover to this website. And you could see it. I hear this all the time from the Mars people. They'll wake up in the morning and somebody broke the news of something that the Mars rover discovered while they were sleeping, right? Because there's a direct line. And so you can actually grab the images and see them and make something interesting in your dome before the science team even gets a hold of it. So that's all kind of all I wanted to share.
Well, has anybody else brought an app that they wanted to, or a technique that they wanted to share?
So I guess I can just say, my name's Gus. I'm a solar system ambassador in DC. I do a lot of image processing for my day job, and I use Python for that typically. There's some really useful libraries or packages in Python like scikit-image that kind of introduce image processing techniques in, I guess the difficulty is you don't have a lot of the same kind of like graphic user interfaces, but you can still do some really impressive techniques, and a lot of the functions that they have pretty developed tutorials and things in their documentation, which is also an option, I guess, for teaching.
Yeah, and that highlights again, this is all just data, and all these programs are doing, I mean, it looks fancy and stuff and it looks artistic, but it's all math, right? All they're doing is math, right, Gus? I mean, that's what your Python code does too, right? It changes the values
absolutely.
of the pixels. Yeah,
it's all just a bunch of matrices.
Yeah, and so it's really important for me personally to get across to students that, okay, math class might be boring, right? Depending on who your math teacher is, but this is math. This is what real math is, right? It's complex, it's beautiful, it's engaging, and Gus, do you have a link where you like to send people to get started on Python image processing?
Yeah, let me grab one for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a good place to mention, yeah, again, if you know any computer programming language, again, these are all just numbers in matrices, like Gus said, and you can find many ways to do it. I know a lot of people like the graphic user interface, but I should mention that coding allows you infinitely more power, right? If you know how to manipulate code, you can do much more. Has anyone actually tried any of the AI art stuff yet? If you haven't, it's wild. It's absolutely wild. Rosemary's, yes. Yes, so Rosemary's asking about panoramas. Yes, any sort of panorama that you have. I've even taken some of those old Apollo ones that didn't go quite all the way around, and you can smudge it, you can magic it, as long as I try to let people know that I've done a little bit of quote unquote photoshopping to it, just so you're not trying to pass off something as real. But yeah, and Rosemary, if you have a specific example of something you need help with, just let me know. I'm happy to help.
Thank you.
Yeah, just like this one, I can't remember who asked for it now, but someone on Dome Dialogues was saying, I have this thing, I want to put it on my dome, but I don't know how. Yeah, it's relatively easy. Stuff like this takes just a few minutes if you have the know-how.
Yeah, Rosemary's point that resizing the canvas is a very powerful thing, and keeping the areas transparent for the dome is very important. So yes, you can do all of that. Pretty neat. Has anybody used? I mean, well, I was hoping there would be somebody who is using Blender, because Blender can also be used as an image processor, basically. Or am I wrong on that?
It can, but having used both GIMP and Blender, I would say if you're just doing stills, just use a program that focuses on stills, because the Blender interface, it's not meant for this, right? If that makes sense. So if you're going to use a GUI anyway, Blender can do Python. I'm sure Gus knows, but if you're going to be using a graphical user interface anyway, these programs are free. You don't really get a benefit from forcing a square peg into a round hole with Blender kind of thing, if that makes sense. At least I found.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I know in Krita, it's used by cartoonists, illustrators, and concept artists. And if you go to their website, it's just krita.org, there's examples there of amazing artwork that people have created. And I think people that, a real artist, a professional artist, will use a what do you call it? An actual
tablet, an actual
tablet and a pen. What's the pen that they call it? A
stylus.
Stylus, yeah. And in some cases, you can actually have a brush, an actual physical brush, but the software provides you with all different kinds of brushes that you can use.
Yeah, you saying that actually reminds me that so if you're interested in animation, then that's how you do. That's what Blender is used for, right? So if you're drawing in 3 dimensions, or if you're drawing an actual animation, then Blender is the place where you want to go. But if you're just doing a still image, if you're just working with still images, GIMP or Krita or some of the other programs is your best bet, in my experience.
If I'm not mistaken, I read that Krita has animation capability.
Oh yeah?
But I would not stake my life on that.
Okay. Yeah, Blender is really good in, especially if you're drawing in 3 dimensions. You can actually paint in 3 dimensions in Blender. Tish, yeah, so these programs are free, but you do have to download Krita and GIMP. Someone was asking earlier that there are different websites that let you do some capabilities. Yeah, so this is just the more powerful version, and they're really not that big. The downloads are not that big, and the installation is very easy.
If you end up using one of these a lot, one of these open source, free open source, that you can make donations to the organization. And I feel a moral obligation if I'm using Krita a lot. I just made a donation to Krita this morning just because it's been a long time since I donated to them, and they're worthy of support.
Yeah. Same with GIMP, same with Blender.
Yeah.
All of those. I mean, that's how open source works. Yeah, and I hope, if nothing else, this has inspired you to go grab a James Webb photo, right? A Hubble image, and just play with it. NASA logos, NASA mission patches. Someone was asking me about NASA mission patches earlier, and yeah, you can grab the NASA mission patches, make whatever you want out of it, make whatever art you want. Rosemary, go ahead.
I don't remember the specific tool I used. I was looking for it, but if you Google something like background removal tool, there are some free ones, and a lot of them have AI in them. So as a first cut for removing a sky, the one I used was not bad. It did a pretty good job. You would, if you were really wanted to refine it, you would try to use something else to clean up the edge. But
yeah, that's a perfect example. Yeah, you could bring it in. You could bring that finished one, the AI one in, and just clean it up. And you can zoom in as far as you want. And let me show you actually. Go ahead, Rosemary, while I'm showing people this.
I was just going to say the one I used, and I'll put in the chat if I find it. I put in some 360s images that were fairly large. And only afterwards did I see that there was like a 5 megabyte limit, but I didn't know that at the time, and it did it. So
yeah, you'll find some limits here and there for open source images. They do need to make a living. People need to make a living, I suppose. But just to show you an example of what that means, to go in. So here's an image of Pluto, of the mountains on Pluto, and if you wanted to remove the sky. In fact, I'm going to do this non-destructively because I was mentioning non-destructive. And you just go in, and I'm going to grab my paint tool, and I'm just going to paint the sky away. And I can go as fine as I want, all the way down. I can zoom in all the way down to literally the pixel that I want to get rid of. And it gets very tedious. Like I was saying, if you're a perfectionist like I am, this can suck up your whole life. But if you're roughly okay, there you go. Right, so I just started there, but you can see how you can remove the sky and you can have your audience be on Pluto. Can you explain how to? Okay, so control and scroll. So I'm holding down the control button. I'm on a PC. I'm holding the control button and just scroll. There are also an innumerable amount of keyboard shortcuts. They're all listed here though. So for example, if I wanted to do view zoom, I could do zoom here, right? Under the view menu, the zoom is right here, and you can zoom in and out as you like. So zoom in, zoom out is plus and minus, apparently. Did I know that? Like Alan said, we're always learning new things. Yeah, there you go. Plus, just plus, 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 minus, minus, minus.
And then for moving the image around, what's the easiest way?
Yeah, I like my middle mouse button. My middle mouse button will move it around. I'm clicking and holding my middle mouse button. I'm moving it around.
Thank you.
I want to mention before it's time to close out is that I took an iPhoneography course, which was a photography course taught by a professional photographer who does all of her work now with an iPhone. And there was an app that she showed us that was an amazing app that does a whole bunch of different photo operations for correcting smudging, filters, all kinds of things, and it's called Snapseed.
Yeah, and if you've heard of the Google Pixel line, they have a whole. They literally call it Magic Eraser, where you can basically do draw something in the background and it will clone and mask and blend, do all this stuff just for you right there. So yeah, so it's getting amazing these days, and what you can do is only getting more accessible. So if nothing else, I hope I've spurred you into realizing that you can do this. You can make any sort of imagery or artwork, flyer, promotional, graphic for your website, a background for your website, a panorama for your dome, whatever you need. these days. It's getting better and better all the time. Dario, go ahead.
I would just like to point out, or just say that I use a lot of command line tools
Mhm.
for batch processing.
Yeah.
There are some most of the tools that exist in Linux have been ported to Windows, and
Mhm.
likewise. I'll just use the chat a bit to give you an example. Okay, you can use a tool like wget to download lots of files from a folder or even a complete website.
Mhm.
For instance, if you'd like to download all images of a selected wavelength from SDO for the sun, you could use a line like this one. So this will download all the images in 171 angstroms from January 2nd this year.
Yeah.
Then you can use a different tool. This is a quite old one, but I find it's still very useful. NetPBM. It's a collection of graphics of graphics libraries. I'll just put the whole line. Okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, and so what Darius, for those of you who aren't sure what he's talking about, NASA publishes our data online for anybody to access, and Dario is offering you some simple command line things. You just put it into your Windows command prompt, and it will download for you all these layers, all this data. Again, it's just data. Again, these images are data, and you can manipulate them, layer them however you want once you have them in whatever program you want. And so this is just an example of SDO data that you can get. You can sign up for feeds. You can grab the most recent images. And I think I've said this before, but SDO, the Solar Dynamic Observatory, is a boon to planetariums because they actually output their data in 4K by 4K, 4096 by 4096, which is a 4K full dome format. And if you can imagine this on your dome surrounding your entire audience, my most recent show, which was an Ovos adaptation that I did for Alan, it had that kind of data in it that I downloaded. It did exactly what Dario said. I downloaded all the frames, and I outputted it, and I manipulated it, and I strung it into a video. It's amazing stuff. It's jaw-dropping stuff.
We use it at the National Air and Space Museum.
Perfect.
Okay. These files are in JPEG 2000 format, and they come in grayscale. So I use this line to convert all the files in the folder to a colorized JPEG file, which can be opened with any software. And then
Great.
I use a third tool called FFmpeg to create a video, an animation from all those files.
Yeah.
So this keeps my computer busy for a while. I don't have to be at the computer, and I can go to the kitchen and make dinner and something like that. The computer does all the work, and in the end, I have a very nice video. In this case, it's the first commands will resize it to 2K, and the video is in 1K. But of course, you just tweak the parameters and and you can get the video in 4K with whichever quality you want.
Dario, can I ask you, have you tried the JHelio viewer program?
Yes, I have.
Yes, you have. Do you like it?
I haven't used it for a while.
Okay.
I admit.
I was just going to ask if you liked it or not, but if you haven't used it in a while, no worries. But JHelio viewer is another one. JHelioViewer.org is this one, where if you're looking, again, this is just sun data. You would wish that all the NASA programs would create this for all their data, but this is just it's a free program, and it's just a way to get all the images, get all the data, like Dario was telling you, and you could make movies out of it, all that stuff. This deserves its own separate hour, really. But But yeah, so if you've never heard of JQ the Viewer, that's the one I used for my OVO show, Alan. Rosemary, go ahead.
I want to thank all of you and also Dario for some of the stuff he put in. One application I had before was with Science on a Sphere data. It comes in separate frames or in a movie version, but sometimes the movie version is not the right speed. And also maybe I want to just emphasize a few changes. And so I found a way to slow down the video on my computer by twice as slow as the original speed. But sometimes I want to take those images and give a certain amount of, and it could be like 100, and specify how much time in between the images in order to change it to a video. And that's probably in the command that Dario just put up there, but I was wondering if you could point out how you control the time between your frames.
Absolutely. So Blender can do that. So let me pull it up here. Okay, so if you go to video editing, I'm going to do new video editing. Right here is the frame rate that you can change. And this is in our old Blender video editing workshop. And I can show you specific examples. I wonder if I have just a random video here. Oh, maybe I'll just pull this one in. This is my Art of Mars screenshot. And you can actually chain, just click and drag. You can say, I want it to last 100 frames in this 24 frames per second video. Does that kind of make sense, Rosemary?
Are you just truncating it in that part? Are you actually
So this one is
stretching out
one.
the time?
Yeah, this one is a specific frame. This is just one image. If I had a movie, it would be a series of images, a series of frames. But you can just click and drag, and this is how many frames it's going. So if I want it to go 240 frames, I don't know if you can see the numbers, but there.
Yeah.
That is 240 frames now, and it is exactly 10 seconds long in this 24 frames per second. And I can move that however I want. I can extend it, I can truncate it as short as I want. I can move the whole thing anywhere I want in the video.
Okay. So if I understand, you control the time between frames on the right-hand panel, but you can also control sort of a segment of the frames. Is that what the bottom's doing?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and if you have a specific video or image that you want me to give you as an example, I can whip that up for you. Again, it just takes a few seconds, honestly, as long as you know what you're looking for. And that's the biggest issue, right? That's why we're doing these workshops, because we want people to know what to look for.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
There's a lot to learn here.
Yeah, and like Alan said, I mean, I don't feel like I'm an expert even after using this for 2 decades, basically. Because Alan, I used GIMP back when we were at the hall, and that's how I made a lot of our visuals. But there's always more to learn, and so that's why I kind of want to spread the message that even if you're just starting right now, right, you can still start using it. You can still start teaching it to other people, introducing it to other people, say students. I hope you don't feel like you need to have 20 years of experience to start using and start teaching these.
Your students will teach you.
Yeah, your students will, exactly. Your students will teach you. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks to everybody who came. This is it's been a pretty exciting session.
Yeah, and always feel free. I'm going to put my email in chat. If anybody has any questions at all in the future, if you have specific requests, that's my whole job. That's my full-time job, is to help you do what you need to do. Thanks to everyone who shared what they used.
Thank you.